You are a knight in a white cloak with a black cross. Your armor is still warm with the blood of others. Beneath your chainmail, a hair shirt prickly digs into your skin with every breath. In your hand, a sword. On its blade, the last drop of a pagan's life. You did not kill out of hatred. You killed by order, by the will of God, and by papal bull. Purification, that's what they called the slaughter. And then, the chapel, the eternal light, the scent of incense, and sweat, and wax. You remove your helmet. Your face is stone, without remorse. You are a brother of the order, a monk, a warrior. And this is not a paradox. It is a system. As Weigand of Marburg wrote, they killed to save souls, their own and others. Imagine, men who took vows of poverty owned more land than kings. Men who took vows of silence commanded armies. Men who took vows of obedience built an empire. This was not medieval madness. This was the Teutonic Order. By 1301, they had 120 castles, from the Elbe to the Niemen, encompassing 100,000 square kilometers, more than Portugal. And all of this was achieved without any personal interest, because they had no personal interests, only common ones, only the order. Their discipline eliminated corruption. Their obedience eliminated chaos. Their poverty made them richer than any king. Now, a question. How did a handful of armored monks create a state that emperors feared? How did prayer become a weapon? How did a monastery transform into a fortress? You will find out. But first, remember this moment in 1410, on the field of Grunwald, 8,000 Teutonic knights perished, almost the entire elite, in a single day. This would be like the U.S. losing 90% of its generals today, in 24 hours. Look at your hands. Imagine that every prayer is a sword stroke, and every stroke a prayer. Where is the line between saint and killer? And who decides that what is holy is not a crime? Jerusalem, 1190. The air is sharp in your throat, smoke, ash, the smell of burnt flesh. You stand amidst the wreckage of a camp. Corpses surround you. But in a tent of rough canvas, there is another world. There a monk in a cassock washes the festering wounds of a crusader. His fingers tremble, but his voice is firm. He whispers, "In nomine Patris." The water in the basin is already pink. Beyond the canvas, the cries of Saracens. And at that moment, he rises. He takes a sword from a dead knight. Not for revenge, for defense. Because mercy without strength is an empty sound. And here it is, the first Teutonic paradox. The hand that kisses the cross holds a sword. You didn't know it, but everything changed in 1198. Pope Innocent III signed a bull, and a brotherhood of nurses transformed into an army of monks. But the essence wasn't in permission to kill. The essence was in discipline. They lived by the rule of Benedict: poverty, obedience, labor. No personal accounts, no escapes, only orders, only the order. Their mornings began with prayer, their evenings with reports, and between them, marching, building, fighting. They didn't fight for glory. They fought as they prayed, methodically, without emotion, and this made them more formidable than any baron. Imagine, you see a castle. It stands on a hill, white, impregnable, but inside it is not a monastery. There are cellars with bars, chains, screams. Chronicles record, before laying the foundations, the Teutons executed pagan prisoners right at the moat, so that the earth would remember. Each of their castles was not a defense, it was a threat. It was the language of power. Villages surrendered without waiting for a siege, because they knew resistance meant death, submission meant slavery, and baptism was a form of control. But the Middle East became too small. The sands could not contain their ambitions. So they looked north to the Baltic. There, forests were like walls, rivers like roads, peoples without churches, without a pope, without fear. For the Teutons, this was an empty field, God's blank canvas, and they decided to draw a Christian empire upon it. 1 castle, then 10, then 120, each like a nail in the flesh of paganism. But the farther from Jerusalem, the weaker the prayer became, and the harder the sword. Your pulse quickens. You feel the cold steel in your palm. But ask yourself, when does mercy become violence? And who decides that for a higher purpose, People can be broken like kindling. Rome, 1226. You stand in the Pope's reception room. The air is thick with incense and fear. Before Gregory IX is Hermann von Salza. His cloak is without a single wrinkle. His voice like a sharpened blade. Prussia is rotting. He doesn't speak of gold. He doesn't ask for titles. He speaks of order, of purity, of a border that must be sealed with sword and prayer. And the Pope believes him, because he sees in him not a conqueror. He sees an instrument, pure, without royal greed, without baronial chaos. Only discipline, only obedience, only the cross. But the Golden Bull of Rimini was not a blessing. It was a corporate charter. The Pope wrote a check for an entire country, all lands cleansed of paganism, forever to the order. Not to Poland, not to Germany, not to the emperor, only to them, monks with swords. Every captured forest was their property, every village their asset. And the most frightening thing, no one could recall them, neither king, nor pope, nor God, because God had already given his approval, through the bull. You didn't know it, but the Pope didn't know one thing. A year before this meeting, the Teutons were already in Prussia, secretly, without sanction. They were driving the piles of the first castles into foreign soil, while Rome slept. This is called a fait accompli, a fact that cannot be undone. Von Salza did not ask permission. He created a reality that Rome merely had to legalize. Diplomacy like chess, the Pope thought he was making a move. But in reality, he was signing off on an already lost game. Now they had a license and a plan. Not raids, logistics. Not slaughter, colonization. Each castle was a node in a network. Marienburg, Balga, Königsberg, white fortresses, like nails in the flesh of the forest. And inside, not just gunpowder and chains. Archaeologists find scales there, counting boards, amber beads. This was not an army. It was a corporation with swords, profit, in grain, in amber, in souls. And the farther from Jerusalem, the louder the coins jingled, and the quieter the prayers. Imagine, you are a Prussian. You see a white castle on the hill. It is beautiful. It is clean. It promises order. But behind the wall is a pit with chains, and a monk who doesn't ask if you believe. He decides for you, because now he is not a servant of God. He is the owner of the land, and he has a papal license for violence. And now the question, when does a mission become a business? And who oversees those who hold both the sword and the license for it? Marienburg, 1300. Dawn has not yet touched the towers. The Comptoir walks down the corridor. His steps are silent. First, the storerooms. Sacks of rye, barrels of salt, crates of amber. Everything accounted for. Everything locked away. Then, the chancellery. On the table, a dispatch. Brother Heinrich had doubts. He wrote a letter to Rome, asked for mercy for the Prussians. The Comptoir picks up a quill, signs. Execution. Without tremor, without anger. This is not revenge. It is hygiene, like cutting out gangrene. And only then, the chapel. Knees on stone, prayer. Help me to be faithful. For him, the sword and the cross are not a contradiction. They are two hands of one God. One holds a sword, the other, a candle. Imagine you are an accountant in the 21st century. Your reports are clean. Your figures are ironclad. But what if every line in your spreadsheet is a death sentence? You didn't know it, but the Teutons kept records more accurately than any European court. Archives preserve in 1351, Balga Castle sent 120 sacks of rye, 300 pounds of wax, and 14,000 amber beads to Marienburg. Each bead, a groschen. Each groschen, gunpowder. Each gunpowder, a bullet. The system worked like clockwork. Each castle, a corporate branch. The Comptoir, governor, general, and chief accountant. Orders, from the center. Money, to the center. Even mercenaries receive their pay not from a baron, but from the order's treasury. Are your palms sweating? Imagine you are the enemy. You've won a battle, burned a castle. But the next year the Teutons return, with a new wall, a new army, new chains, because their war is not emotion, it's logistics. Their wealth is not luxury, it's ammunition. Amber, northern gold, went to Venice, Paris, Constantinople, and back. Coin, coin, sword, sword, castle, castle, soul, soul, again amber. The circle was complete. But the more white walls they built, the more shadows grew behind them. Every captured forest, a new vow of revenge. Every forced baptism, a new spark. And one day, these sparks united. Pole and Lithuanian, Catholic and pagan, enemies yesterday, brothers today. They were united not by faith, they were united by hatred of the white cloaks. And then the sky over Grunwald darkened, not from clouds, from arrows. And now, a question. When does a system become a monster? And who is to blame, the one who creates order, or the one who remains silent within it? A deep forest on the border of Poland and Lithuania. Night. The moon is hidden by clouds. Two riders dismount. One is Jagiello, King of Poland, a baptized Christian. The other is Vytautas, Grand Duke of Lithuania, a former pagan. They are not friends, they are rivals. But today, they stand face to face, in silence broken only by the crackling of twigs underfoot. Then Jagiello extends his hand. Vytautas takes it, and they swear, "We will destroy the white dogs of Rome." Not for glory, not for land, but for freedom. Because each of them had seen how the Teutonic Order turned faith into chains, and they decided it was time to break those chains. In this handshake, an army capable of shattering the myth of the Order's invincibility is born. You didn't know it, but a Catholic and a pagan found common ground in one night, not through dogma, not through papal bulls, but through pain. The Teutons called Jagiello a false Christian for ruling pagans without slaughter. Vytautas, an apostate for not massacring his ancestors. For the Order, peace was weakness, mercy was heresy, and it was this intolerance that united enemies. Poland provided heavy cavalry, Lithuania, light cavalry and knowledge of swamps, trails, and ambushes. Together, 51,000 warriors from 27 nations, more than in any army of the Yekaterinburg Empire. But here's what the chronicles conceal. You didn't know it, but 30% of the mercenaries in the Teutonic ranks had already received gold from Vytautas, double pay, so that at the decisive moment they would disappear, or turn their swords against the white cloaks. The Order depended on mercenaries. Its brothers couldn't fill all the ranks, and mercenaries took no vows. Their loyalty was bought, and in 1410 it was bought not by the monks, but by their enemies. Thus, a secret deal in the forest became a storm over the battlefield. Chronicles record, when the Teutonic cavalry charged, the flanks disintegrated, not from fear, but according to plan. July 1410. The sky is black with arrows. The earth trembles. In the air, cries in Latin, prayers in Lithuanian, the clang of steel. And in the center, the white cloaks. They advance, confident, invincible, because that's how it always was. But today, it's not always. Today, 8,000 knights will die, almost the entire elite, in one day. This is like NATO losing 90% of its generals in 24 hours. Do you feel your palms tremble? Imagine, you are the compteur. You give an order, and your mercenaries are silent and disappear into the fog. And here is the question that keeps historians awake. When a system built on trust and discipline suddenly encounters betrayal bought with foreign gold, who is to blame? The one who broke the oath, or the one who believed that oaths were eternal? The morning of July 15th, 1410. Fog clings to the steel of the armor like a final prayer. The earth trembles, not from thunder, but from the hooves of 50,000 horsemen. In the center is Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen. His white cloak flaps like a banner, already devoid of meaning. He knows today it is not an army that falls. It is a myth. To his left, Polish hussars, spears like a forest. To his right, Lithuanians, arrows like rain. Behind him, mercenaries whose eyes look not at the enemy, but at purses. Ulrich does not shout. He does not bless. He simply turns and rides forward, to his death. An hour later, His body will be found beneath the corpses of horses. Arrows, in his chest, in his neck, in the eye slit of his helmet. But his hand still clutches his sword, a final gesture of loyalty to a system that had long ceased to be holy. You didn't know it, but Grunwald didn't defeat the order. It unraveled it. It revealed that inside was not divine fire, but a fragile hierarchy. 3 fatal mistakes. First, they thought numbers were a minor detail. They had 30,000. Juggiello and Vitatus had 100,000. Second, their tactic, a full armored battering ram, was already obsolete. The enemy was already firing gunpowder bombardments and hiding in swamps. Third, Ulrich led the attack himself, and when he fell, the army turned into a herd, because the system had no backup brain, only one center, and it was killed. 8,000 knights. Imagine, 90% of NATO's officer corps perishing in one day. All the generals, all the commanders, all the memory of war, erased. Among the dead, 203 compteurs, 500 brothers in white cloaks, almost the entire elite. No one was left who knew how to build castles, keep accounts, or command a fleet. The order lost not only its swords but its mind, and without it, only shadows in the towers. After Grunwald, the Teutons survived, like ghosts. The castles stood, but the chapels were silent. Instead of prayers, the creaking of torture racks. Instead of brotherhood, the whisper of intrigues. The Pope no longer wrote bulls. Neighbors ceased to fear, and within, doubt. It grew slower than the plague, but killed more surely. Because an empire built on faith in its own righteousness cannot withstand one question. What if we are not saints? What if we are just conquerors in cassocks? Are your palms sweating? Imagine, you are the last brother in Marienburg. You are washing the floor in the barracks, and on the wall, Ulrich's rusty sword. And for the first time, you ask the question that kills orders more than any arrow. What was all this for? Autumn 1480. Wilhelm stands by the ruins of Königsberg. His cloak is gray, like ash after a fire. Not white, not holy. In his hands, not a sword, a sack of rye grain. He looks at the crumbling walls where he once prayed according to the rule of Benedict: silence, poverty, obedience. Now he pays tribute to the Polish king, trades amber with the Dutch, and is silent, not by vow, but from shame. Inside, emptiness, deaf, cold, like the cellars where pagans were once held. He knows he did not betray the order. He betrayed himself, and if he could go back in time, he would still flee. Because a faith that demands killing in the name of God ceases to be faith. It becomes a weapon. And a weapon, even the most sacred, sooner or later rusts. You didn't know it, but the decline of the Teutons began not on the field of Grunwald. It began in the chanceries. After the defeat, the Pope stopped sending bulls. Poland demanded 100,000 gulden, the equivalent of the Marienburg castle 10 times over. Revenues collapsed. Hanseatic merchants intercepted the amber routes. Compteurs, once impeccable, began taking wives, appropriating lands. The monastic vow, a farce. The castles, feudal residences. When Luther nailed his theses in 1517, the order did not respond, because it was no longer monastic nor military, only an empty shell. But here's what the archives conceal. The last Grand Master, Albrecht von Hohenzollern, secretly read Luther a year before his abdication. Not just read, he underlined passages. Marginalia were found in his library. If the church errs, who has the right to correct it? This wasn't betrayal. It was recognition. Recognition that a system built on sacred violence, baptism by the sword, torture of wolves, colonization under the cross, could no longer survive in a world where people asked questions. And when Albrecht shed his cloak, he didn't kill the order. He saved what remained, the land, the people, the memory, from complete annihilation. In 1525, the sword was broken, but not discarded. It was reforged into a scepter. From the order state born in the fire of the Crusades, a secular duchy emerged, the first in Europe based on Reformation principles. This was not an end. It was a transformation. Because even the most sacred ideas, if they become weapons, turn into politics. And it is at this moment, when prayer yields to treaty, and the cross to the seal on a charter, that a new era begins. Are your palms dry? Imagine you hold an idea in your hands, pure, holy. But to defend it, you take up a sword. How much time will pass before you forget why you took up the sword, and not why you hold it? April 1525, Wawel Cathedral. Albrecht von Hohenzollern kneels. But this is not prayer. It is a transfer of power. He wears no cloak. A mantle, purple, heavy, like conscience. Polish King Sigismund places a hand on his head and says, "You are no longer a servant of the Pope. You are the Duke of Prussia." Albrecht rises, and at that moment, the Teutonic sword does not break. It is reforged into a scepter, into law, into a treaty. You didn't know it, but this was not a capitulation. It was a system hack. He took the order state, 100,000 square kilometers, larger than Portugal, and transformed it into a secular principality without shedding a drop of blood. Because in Luther's era, those who survive are not those who shout loudest, but those who can change form, like water. Imagine you are a religious project that has lost credibility. Your investors, the Pope and the Emperor, have withdrawn funding. Your users, the Prussians, Poles, Lithuanians, demand an update. What do? Albrecht launched a rebranding. He took Luther's idea that church lands should serve the people and turned it into a legal instrument. Instead of fighting Poland, he became its vassal. Instead of the monastic treasury, the ducal treasury. Instead of a vow, a marriage contract. And here's an irony worthy of a screenplay. He married Dorothea, Sigismund's daughter, and her grandfather, Jagiello, was the very one who, in 1410, wiped the Teutonic elite from the face of the earth at Grunwald. Now his great-granddaughter is the Duchess of Prussia. Enemies became family. The sword, a wedding ring. Blood, fertilizer for a new order. Are your palms dry? Look at your hands. Imagine you're holding not a phone, but a sword. You believe it's holy. You've fought with it for years. But one day you notice the hilt is covered not with blessings, but with rust. And then you decide to reforge it or throw it away. Albrecht chose the former, because an idea born in the fire of the Crusades could only live on if it stopped being fire, to become earth, to become law, to become an agreement at a table, not a sentence at the stake. Thus ended an era where prayer and sword were one strike. But the question remained, and it echoes right now in your head when you defend what you believe in. Are you a saint or an executioner? And who decides where that line is drawn? The entire history of the Teutonic Order is a chain of logic forged in steel and prayer. Discipline, not as a virtue but as a weapon. They took the rule of Benedict and melted it into a combat code. Poverty killed corruption, obedience, chaos, silence, betrayal. The result? 120 castles in 80 years. From the Elbe to the Niemen, a white network of power, tighter than any royal army. But efficiency demands sacrifices, and the order began to pay not with gold but with blood, others' blood, baptism by the sword, burned sanctuaries. Villages turned to ash under papal bull. Violence became a system, and the system, a dogma. And then the world began to turn away, even Rome, because a holy war against already Christianized lands, that is not a mission. It is robbery in a cassock. Legitimacy evaporated like dew under the midday sun, and inside the castles, a question echoed, one that crumbles empires. What if we are wrong? You stand in the ruins of Marienburg. The wind whistles through the embrasures where crossbowmen once stood. On the stone, a faded inscription, "Not unto us, O Lord, but unto thy name." You read this and feel a chill in your chest. Not from the wind. From the understanding this was not a crusade. It was an experiment in sacred violence. And it failed, not because the enemies were stronger, but because prayer mixed with blood ceases to be prayer. It becomes justification. And justification is always the first step to collapse. Perhaps the most terrifying form of fanaticism is not that which shouts in the square, but that which whispers Ave Maria before an execution. A scream can be stopped. A prayer cannot. And as long as the world hears only the prayer, it does not see bodies falling behind the wall. The Teutons were not monsters. They were convinced, like inquisitors, like revolutionaries. like anyone who believes that the end justifies the means. And in this, their tragedy. Because conviction without doubt, that is not faith. It is a prison. And doubt? Doubt is the first crack in the wall. Through it, light enters. And conscience. So who are they? Defenders of faith or colonizers in white cloaks? Saints who brought light to pagan forests? Or murderers hiding greed behind the cross? Do not look for the answer in textbooks. It is not there. The answer is within you. Because every time you justify violence for a higher purpose, be it war, career, or an idea, you become part of this chain: discipline, efficiency, violence, collapse. Look at your hands. Imagine that they hold not a phone, but a sword. You believe it is holy. But how much blood is already on the hilt? And most importantly, whose is it? Write in the comments, saints or murderers. Your voice is not an opinion. It is the voice of conscience, which still argues with the silent walls of Marienburg, the Order's largest castle, now a UNESCO site. And a reminder, even the most pious empires are built on bones. And prayer, mixed with blood, never ascends to heaven. It settles into the earth, like ash.